Hello there. One of the most requested topics is for me to talk about the film Black Robe. The reasons behind this are fairly obvious. The film is set in early 1600s Iroquoian. That's my period. So I finally got around to watching this film. I'm always apprehensive about watching, I don't know, I'm going to term it Indian movies. I'm always apprehensive about watching them because I've had a lot of bad experiences. So I finally got around to watching it, and I was not impressed. The film itself is just fine. Racism aside, it's not great, it's not bad, it's just fine. The film's portrayal of indigenous people is not good. Um, its portrayal of Mohawk people is just downright bad. Just straight up old-fashioned demonization. The film has got a lot of the same problems of like a 1960s Western. It's sort of like a 1960s Western made 30 years too late. So I was thinking about how I should talk about this film. So there were several angles that occurred to me, so I could go through it like I did with the film Hostiles and break down piece by piece everything I remembered that was problematic, everything about it that bugged me. I don't have the same animosity towards this film that I did towards Hostiles, and so I don't have the same passion to tear into it the same way I did for Hostiles. That sort of project doesn't really sound fun for me. Another thing I could do is I could do the typical history YouTuber thing, pick it apart piece by piece in terms of its historical accuracy. So this film gets a lot of credit for being historically accurate. It's not. It's got historically accurate vibes. It feels historically accurate if you don't know anything about the period. There's a lot of stuff it does wrong. So one example. This is an example that ties into both angles, the historical accuracy as well as the social justice. So there's a scene fairly early into the film where the priest is explaining how writing works to a group of Indians, and the Indians are all like, like minds blown, holy cow, this is insane, this guy's some sort of witch, right? This is wrong. The people had writing. It was pictograph writing. Now, pictograph writing is obviously very different from like Latinized writing, but the difference between pictograph writing and Latin writing isn't some big conceptual thing. It's not like, oh, this opens up whole new worlds of possibilities. I never thought this could even be possible. The difference between them is grammar. Pictograph writing it's got a lot of nouns. It's got some adjectives, it's got some verbs. What it's missing is grammar. It doesn't have these and ands and ofs. That's the advantage that an alphabet has over it. It has these little conceptual words. So to give a sort of simile, the difference between pictograph writing and an alphabet isn't like the difference between a bicycle and no bicycle. It's like the difference between a fixed gear bike and a 10-speed. They both do the same thing, but one of them's a heck of a lot more versatile. So they wouldn't have been, whoa, mind blown, this guy's a witch. That's wrong. So the filmmaker, either he didn't do his research or he didn't care. He never thought to ask, oh, I wonder if these people had any writing or writing equivalent. Right? He just assumed that he knew the answer. He included that scene because it presented a certain vibe for the native people. Right? Okay, they're sort of backwards and superstitious, and these are all the benefits of Christianity, whatever, I don't know. Another inaccuracy off the top of my head, there's a scene later in the film where they're attacked by Mohawks. Mohawks attack them with bows and arrows. That's wrong. This film takes place in 1634, I think. This is after Mohawk people have unrestrained access to the gun markets. Mohawk people push the Mohicans east of the Hudson River and gain full access to the Dutch gun markets. These people shouldn't be attacking with bows and arrows, they should be attacking with muskets, like overwhelming musket firepower. Another scene where some of the people are talking about muskets and saying, muskets are no good, they only kill once. Another fellow said, no. Muskets can be used many times. You just have to learn how to use them like a bow and an arrow. Right, and stuff like, no. This is the 1630s. Muskets have been in this region for 30 years. Maybe not everybody would have one, but they'd be familiar with the concept. So there's a lot of historical inaccuracies that are like that, and I could go through and make a 2-hour video nitpicking all of the little things in this film, but I don't want to do that. That's boring to me. So I was thinking about this film and wondering if I should even bother talking about it at all, because I don't really have all that much to say. I don't want to praise it, but the criticism, I don't really think it's worth it. I'm not interested in doing that. Then I started looking online to see what other people were saying about it. Looked on IMDb, user reviews, Rotten Tomatoes, even like some YouTube reviews, this, that, and the other. And then okay, I got my angle. A lot of these user reviews, a lot of the comments on these YouTube videos were just outright racism. And stuff like, wow, Iroquois suck. Or more generally, one of the broadest category of reviews was stuff like, this is the film that Dances with Wolves should have been. This film is a refreshing antidote to Dances with Wolves. Stuff like that. Apparently there's a sizable portion of people who are just incensed at the notion that there could be a positive portrayal of Indigenous people. Right? Dances with Wolves is something deeply, deeply offensive to them. Right? It's just... No, no Indians are allowed to have positive portrayals. There can be no positive portrayals of Indians because everybody knows they're all just savages, stuff like that. When racists like a film for racist reasons, that makes me a lot less inclined to be charitable towards that film. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. Before I get into that, something interesting I noticed, something interesting I stumbled across while I was researching public perceptions of this film, was a review by Ward Churchill. You don't know who Ward Churchill is. He's a AIM guy, a Indigenous Studies guy. He's a pretendian, but he's still worth listening to. He's hardcore. So he made this review where he criticized this film for its negative portrayal. He criticized it for the sexual politics of this film, which are just awful. Called out this film for all of its nonsense. That in and of itself was gratifying, but that's not what's so interesting. About a decade after his review, he wrote his review in the 90s when the film came out. About a decade after that, so the early 2000s, I think, some history guy wrote a review of Ward Churchill's review of Black Robe. It completely missed the point of Ward Churchill's review. It focused on, like, this film is the most historically accurate film ever. That Ward Churchill would dare criticize it shows that Ward Churchill doesn't know anything about history. He's unqualified to talk on history at all or Indigenous issues because he clearly doesn't know that the priest's name was actually spelled with a U rather than just an O. Stuff. This was interesting to me. It's not often you see somebody make a review of a review. Particularly, like Ward Churchill, he's not a film guy. Only Indigenous Studies people are going to read Ward Churchill's review of this film. So why would you spend 15 pages talking about this review? Why would he spend 15 pages talking about that review? That's interesting. That's not the really interesting part. Really interesting part is that about 10 years after that, Ward Churchill published a response to that review. So it's a review of a review of a review of Black Robe. And this last one is just, it's awesome. It's hardcore. It's well worth a read. So if you got an hour spare and you want an interesting read or an interesting series of reads, go look up these 3 reviews. They're well worth your time. They're more worth your time than the film itself is. They're more interesting than the film itself. So during my initial appraisal of this film, I look at the way the film portrays the Mohawks and it's just, whatever. It's just par for the course. It's just, it is what it is. Move on. Not interesting. I sort of just wrote it off as being, yeah, okay, it's a racist film. What do I expect? I don't care. It's not worth getting worked up about. Not worth getting up in arms about, whatever. And this in and of itself is kind of interesting to me. So I compare that to Hostiles. Hostiles, I think, is probably less racist than this film. Hostiles also doesn't target my group, and yet I feel so much more strongly about Hostiles than I do about this film. Why is that? That's interesting to me. Why is that? So I was thinking it through and thinking it has to do with sort of expectations and defense mechanisms. So with a film like this, or like any old sort of Western where you know it's going to be kind of racist, you have this prejudice of the film. That prejudice makes me put up sort of defenses. Like fencing analogy, I'm on guard. Right? And when you're on guard, it's hard for somebody to actually successfully offend you. A film like Hostiles, it makes so many gestures in the right direction. I kept putting my guard down and expecting it to be better than its cliches. And so Hostiles was able to successfully offend me because my guard kept getting lowered. Whereas this film, my guard was just up all the time. And what a depressing prospect that is, isn't it? And so I was cogitating on that, and I come across another review. This one was just published on somebody's blog. And he makes the observation that gangsters in American cinema get more sympathetic, more positive, more rationality for their nastiness than Indians do. I was thinking, oh, yeah, that's right. We take a film like John Wick. That's a gangster movie where the plot is just a formality. The bad guys in John Wick get a more sympathetic portrayal. Why the heck is that? You don't get a film set in America where gangsters just show up and start torturing people without any provocation, without any explanation. We don't get that. That doesn't happen in American cinema. So why doesn't that happen? Why do gangsters get sympathy but Indians don't? It's worse than that though, because gangsters, they're a piece of American society that you can cordon off. The gangsters, let's say that you show gangsters doing something awful, people can compartmentalize that. That's not America as a whole, that's just these gangsters. Gangsters are the worst people in America, so therefore we can show them doing something awful. That's not how this film portrays it. It's not how Indian movies in general portray it. It's not, here are some bandits who just happen to be Mohawk. It's, here are the Mohawks. They're not demonizing a specific demographic of a society. They're demonizing the society. The film goes out of their way to do this. They take the main characters prisoner and they march them all off to the Mohawk village. This is another historical inaccuracy. In reality, this is a huge distance that they're covering. Somebody's wounded at the start of it, and he's still wounded when they get there. In the real world, this would be a huge distance that they're covering. The film makes it look like it's like a day, maybe two. This is a historical inaccuracy, which is included specifically just to show that this is Mohawk society. They didn't have to take them to the village. The filmmakers, they could have just had the Mohawk guys tie them to a tree and then start skinning them. It doesn't fit in with the timeline of the movie. It doesn't fit. It's included specifically to show that this isn't just some specific demographic of Mohawks. It's gross when you think about it like that. It is worth getting mad about. There's another way where the representation is worse than gangster movies, because even within the demographic of gangsters, the specifically worst demographic of American people, aside from maybe corporate lawyers or whatever, you got good gangsters and you got bad gangsters. You got a film and you got like Joe Pesci, he's stabbing somebody with a screwdriver over and over again and kicking him in the shins. That doesn't necessarily reflect on the protagonist gangster. That's not gangsters as a whole, that's Joe Pesci. Oh, it's depressing to think about it like that. Gangsters get more humanization than Indians. God, it's irritating. This is an irritating subject. So I want to return to those YouTube comments which were incensed about Dances with Wolves, upset at the very notion of any positive portrayal whatsoever. I want to ask a question. This is a rhetorical question, so you don't have to take it personally, but I do want you to think about it. Why doesn't When Harry Met Sally have a torture scene at Guantanamo Bay? Think about that for a second. Let's ask another question. Why doesn't Indiana Jones have a scene where policemen murder black people? Think about that for a second. When I previously criticized Hostiles, I took occasion to single out the film's portrayal of the Comanche. I singled it out as being ahistorical. The Comanche, sure, they did some nasty things in their time, but not in this period of this film. During hostiles, the Comanche were defeated, subjugated people crammed into a reservation. It's wrong for the Comanche to be in that film. Therefore, the only reason they included the Comanche is just outright racism. They're the ones they think they can get away with demonizing. This, that, and the other. If I criticize the portrayal of the Mohawk in this film for being racist or whatever, somebody is going to jump in and say, that's just history. You don't like history? Tough luck. It's history. What are you, anti-facts, anti-reason, anti-science? This, that, and the other. Now, I could talk about the portrayal of the Mohawk in this film in terms of historical accuracy. There are historical inaccuracies in the portrayal, in the negative portrayal. But I'd have to get into like nitty-gritty details to talk about that. I want to talk about why this is a problem. Hopefully with my rhetorical example, you already see it. How many films are there which show Mohawk society? A Mohawk village, let's say. How many films are there which show an Iroquoian village? How many films in total? Off the top of my head, I can think of maybe 2. This one, Last of the Mohicans. There's probably a couple of others. Hochelaga. That one's not very good and nobody saw it. Presumably you can think of a couple more examples. Now, of all of those examples, all the ones that you can think of, how many of them show Iroquoian people living ordinary lives being ordinary people? And how many of them show outright demonization? How many of them show, even if it's true history, the worst parts of history, assuming there's no exaggeration? It's a pretty high percentage. Now, with American culture, there are a lot of films which depict the ordinary elements of American culture. So a filmmaker can make a film about the atrocities at Guantanamo Bay, and that doesn't form the totality of the world's opinion of American people. A film like Black Rose might well be the only example of Iroquoian culture in cinema that the particular audience member might have viewed. The audience generally has no frame of reference for Iroquoian peoples. So this film becomes their frame of reference. This film, with its negative portrayal, becomes the totality of the media which is shaping their perception. This is why negative portrayals are such a problem, even if they don't include any exaggeration, even if they don't include any outright explicit racism on the part of the filmmaker. They still contribute to racism in the overall sphere, because there's no sea of American films for this one negative portrayal to be averaged out amongst. I hope that was articulate enough. Imagine if every time an American shows up in TV, movies, whatever, every time an American shows up, that American is murdering black people. Imagine if that is the totality of your culture's depiction in cinema. Don't you see how that would be a bit of a problem? Additionally, this brings up a question. Why is this the totality of the depiction? Why aren't filmmakers interested in showing Iroquoian society in a normal context? Why are they only interested in showing the atrocities? I'll ask another question. Why are filmmakers interested in showing the normal parts of American society? Why aren't they interested in only showing the atrocities? Now, I can think of an answer. Maybe you can think of something else.